morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today at the Commons, the Knowledge and Learning Commons. My name is Natalie. I'm back here in the library alone today, but we have all of you here with us together online. If you're new to us, the Knowledge and Learning Commons is our space at the library to be able to collaborate and cooperate with different departments across UN Geneva to be able to share knowledge and to be able to about new understanding together. So we hope you had a really great summer and were able to take some rest. We're back here post-summer for the very first session for the Commons, and we're very happy to be joining with the Office of the Ombudsman and also the Staff Counsellors Office for a session that we think is quite relevant as we return to work following the summer, but are still facing quite a lot of changes and uncertainties. And today we're looking at the topic, dealing with irritability in uncertain times. The reason we're having this session is because it is a very unprecedented time for us. So what can we do when we find ourselves anxious or perhaps irritable in situations that are at work or perhaps at home as well, as we find ourselves working from home through our telecommuting as well? Our speakers today are going to be walking through two different learning objectives for us. And that is how best to manage our internal dynamics to be able to dampen tempers and soothe irritability, and also how to manage our external relationships after frustrations have perhaps gotten the better of us. So we do have a great lineup of speakers for you today from both the Office of the Ombudsman and the Staff Counsellors Office. They will introduce themselves more fully a bit later on in the session, just after I finish with the introduction. From the Staff Counsellors Office, we have Mary Bridget Leahy and Rosa Vanderhyde. You may have remembered them from previous sessions here at the Commons in the past few months. And also from the Office of the Ombudsman, you'll see on the next page here, Nicholas Theotokatos and Elizabeth Merz. Welcome and thank you so much to all of our speakers for being a part of this session today. We have about an hour together, so it's quite brief. So they'll be taking up a large part of the hour to explain the principles of today's session, but you're welcome to ask any questions. So please, at the right of your screen, there is the Q&A section in French or English, as you wish, whichever language is most comfortable for you. Don't hesitate to ask questions throughout the session. We may not get to answering all of them. The reason being is we have an hour together, and this is a more informational introduction. We will have a follow-up workshop style session on the same topic, but being able to practice a little more together the principles that have been introduced today. And this is going to be by registration. So we're going to share more information about that second session later after this presentation is over. So hold tight if you would like to be a part of the second session as well. And also there'll be some interaction throughout this session. So if you have your phone handy, please have that next to you if you like. We will be using a QR code for a poll to be able to get your thoughts. We would love to have some of your views as well. So either your phone, or we will also post a link in the Q&A section to the right of your screen. We thank you very much for joining and taking the time to be with us for this hour. I'll now pass on to Mary and to Nicholas, our first two speakers for the session. Firstly, over to you, Mary. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session today, and thank you very much for joining us. It's great to come back. We've had a couple of weeks break and we've been focusing on other things. So thank you for joining us today for this webinar. And we're very happy to be presenting in collaboration with the Knowledge and Learning Commons and with the Office of the Ombudsman. So my name is Mary Leahy and I'm one of the staff counsellors based at UNOG in the Palais. We also support many of you who are in agencies in Geneva and around the world. We have a team. There's me, and then there's Rosa Vanderhyde, who will also be speaking today, and then Sharmila Ensler is with us also. Sharmila is here, and she's also helping us deliver our presentations and our workshops. So thank you to everyone, and over to you, Nicholas.
Great, thank you, Mary. My name is Nicholas Theotokatos. I'm the Regional Ombudsman for the UN based here in Geneva. Our team, it consists of Elizabeth Merz, who just recently joined the office. I think this is her first week, and Debbie Varidel, who provides support to the office as well. And I think the only thing I wanted to say as part of an introduction to our office is that one of the things that we're discovering more is the intersection between the work that the staff counselors do and our work. And I think this division in this presentation between internal dynamics and external dynamics really highlights how the two offices work together. So this is hopefully the beginning of greater collaboration between the two offices. And obviously, I think the Knowledge and Learning Commons has put together a great initiative to bring these sorts of presentations to staff. And we look forward to also doing the second part of the workshop, which will be much more skills-based and hands-on. So I'm really excited for the next hour. And without ado, I guess we just jump into the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicholas. So everybody, we're doing something today called, we're using a special app. We're going to send you the instructions now on the next slide. It's called an Irritability Quotidian Scale. So it's just a series of 4 questions. We have a longer questionnaire that we will also send you if you're interested. And it just explains maybe a little taster of maybe what is irritability and how can I notice some triggers in myself. So as Nicholas explained, the first part of our presentation today is about is from the staff counsellors. We're thinking about our body and mind connection and how we react to irritability. And then later, Nicholas and Elizabeth will explain the external part, how other people perceive us, and then what can we do to help. So that's important. And then the next slide, for some of you, you might be comfortable using your phone. You can take a picture of the of this black square, and it should open up a questionnaire for you. Some of you might have something on your phone that says scan QR code, or if you're not comfortable with that, we were going to put a link in the questions part, question and answer part, so you could open it. So, but for anyone maybe who's struggling, I can just do it with you now. Let's see. So you just hold up your phone and take a picture, and it should open. And we'll give you a minute just to take the picture and then read the questions. But if anybody's struggling, I'll just explain a little bit. So there's a scale of 0 to 4, and 0 is when something is happening, there's been a little incident, you would feel very little or no annoyance. If you rate yourself as 1, it means you'd feel a little irritated. 2 means you'd feel moderately upset. 3 is you would feel quite angry, and 4 is you would feel very angry, kind of boiling. So in case anyone can't see, I'll just read out the 4 questions. So one example is you bring your own large portable fan to the office, you plug it in and it doesn't work. And then what are your responses? A little irritated, moderately irritated, or really angry? And often, of course, it depends on the day, how hot it is outside, how hot it is inside, and maybe if you have a car and you're able to drive it, or did you have to take the bus and bring your fan with you on the bus? Then the next question is, you say hello to a colleague in the hallway and they ignore you. So again, if you can just answer, how does that make you feel? Then the third question is, you really need a coffee before your important meeting, but you get interrupted by a colleague and you don't have time to get it. So you're rushing into your meeting and you have no coffee, which many of us rely on. And then the fourth question is, you're wearing a new pair of trousers for the first time. You sit at a desk and it has chewing gum stuck underneath it and it gets on your new trousers. So we'll just give you a minute to answer those questions and send us your feedback. And then later on in the in the presentation, we'll have a look at what most of you are saying and feeling. And then if you're interested, we have a full questionnaire with 25 questions and then an explanation at the end of what each part means. And maybe it will help you gauge how irritable you're feeling maybe today. Thank you.
And maybe, Mary, as people are filling out the poll, maybe I can share a personal experience of irritability that happened this morning. So just before we sat down to start the presentation, my two kids had a huge fight and they both ran away from home, like literally minutes before the presentation was to start. And I was thinking how ironic it is that, moments before an workshop on how to manage irritability, this unforeseen and unanticipated event pops up, and all I wanted to do was scream. But, fortunately, we had gone through the dry run of this presentation, and I was actually able to try to keep everything together and proceed with the presentation without having to make my wife any more upset than she was, and to sort of go and to get the kids back. And so I think it was quite interesting that this happened just before we gave this presentation, and that these unforeseen and unanticipated events sometimes pop up and totally throw us for a loop. And the question is, how do we ride through that in a way that doesn't totally derail our day or our meeting or our presentation? So I just thought this was a nice moment to share that with you as you're filling out the surveys. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicholas. And that's a good point to make. This workshop is for your personal life as well as for things that might happen in the workplace. But it's usually at the Staff Counsellors Office, we cover both. We speak with people for your personal life concerns and also things that are going on at work. So I think you can maybe all see on the screen now. Natalie has put up the results of the survey, so let's see if I can see it. So for the first question, getting up early to go to work at 7. Oh, actually, I didn't read that one out. I must have skipped that one, I'm sorry. You get up extra early to go to work at 7 so you can have some peace and quiet to work on a project. So the most ticked is people would feel a little irritated. And then also you would feel moderately upset. Then for the second one about bringing the large portable fan to the office, again, most of you at the moment would feel a little irritated and a few of you would feel moderately upset. And then some of you would feel very angry and some of you would not feel irritated at all. And then the one about saying hello to the colleague in the hallway. Again, we've got most of you feeling a little irritated and some are actually moderately upset, which is understandable. And then a few of you being on either end of the scale. And then for the last question, you need a coffee before your important meeting. And then again, it's just, sorry, it's flashing there. The most popular answer is that we would be a little irritated, but it's something that most of us maybe are able to deal with, and then you would feel moderately upset. So this is just a little guide to look at our reactions, and I can't actually see if there's a question 5, so let's just see. Oh yeah, so the new pair of trousers, I can't, oh yeah, so I can see it now. Mainly people are feeling moderately upset, and also some people are feeling quite angry and very angry. So all of these reactions are normal reactions to life events. So we're not telling you that you have to be some kind of a saint, you have to be really calm and together all of the time. This is about life. There's lots of irritants in life and lots of things that can make us angry and stressed, and this is perfectly normal. So this was just a taster to see, to judge a few things at work, things in your outside life. So now we'll just get started onto the part of the presentation from the Staff Counsellors Office. So we're calling this internal dynamics. And we want you to think about your mind and your body and how they are connected. So everyone can have a bad day now and again, it's normal. But if you notice that you or someone you care about seems sadder, more worried, or more easily agitated these days, it could be a sign of a more serious condition. So mood-related symptoms can come and go in response to everyday stresses, But if they occur for a long period and cause significant distress or interfere with your daily functioning, it may be an indication to seek help. And actually at the beginning, I should have said how you contact the Staff Counsellors Office is through our email address, staffcounsellor@un.org, and we have a confidential service, so you can come and talk to us. So mood and stress are regulated by a number of brain structures, networks, and chemically neurotransmitted systems. And damage to any of these can show up as a change in mood. Mood changes, for example, depression may cause a mood change. We can maybe display irritability, anger, or a loss of interest and pleasure. Many of us in life, we will have periods of anxiety and depression in our life where we go up and down, and that's okay. We might just go back to the other slide, actually, if that's okay. Before this, great. Actually, just before that, the internal dynamics. Thank you. So mood changes can also stem from a medical condition, such as a thyroid disease or a neurological condition. And sometimes it can be something as simple as sleep. You didn't get enough sleep the night before, or you may have struggled to sleep for maybe a week or a month. And it could be something that's maybe you're living in a very noisy apartment and everybody's home at the moment because of the COVID situation. So it's more difficult for you to get some sleep. But this really can increase our irritability and anxiety. Also, mood symptoms can be a side effect of medication. For example, some anti-malaria medication can cause nervousness or alterations in mood. And the hard part is sometimes we ourselves don't notice that there's a change in our mood, but other people will notice. So you might notice it in a colleague or in a family member, but hopefully someone will be able to speak you can speak with each other and support one another. But what should you do if you're experiencing a significant mood change that lasts for more than a few weeks, or if you notice this in a loved one? Then it is a good idea to see a mental health specialist, and you can start by coming with the Staff Counsellors Office, or if you prefer, you can go to your family doctor and make an appointment. So what might happen then is you could also have a medical evaluation, which would look at your personal history. Maybe have you had any incidents of depression or anxiety in the past, or stress? Have you maybe gone through a recently tough time, or have you maybe lost a loved one? They'll also do a physical exam, maybe take some blood tests and check what's going on with you. For example, you could be low in iron, which might make you tired and more grumpy. And then sometimes they'll also do some tests to gather images of your brain. And the good news is there's more and more research being done every day. And also because of COVID-19, there's more awareness about our mental health and how our mind and our bodies are connected. So there is good research coming out every day, which will help us. So the treatment then, what will you do? It would look at the root cause. So what is the problem? So if, for example, somebody's feeling depressed, your doctor may prescribe psychotherapy or counselling. They may also prescribe an antidepressant. Common one is citalopram, or both. You could have both. The research shows that they work together, that it's not really a good idea just to put someone on antidepressants, say, or anti-anxiety medication. You also need to talk about what's going on so that you can help yourself solve the problems. Otherwise, it doesn't really work so well. You need either the talking therapy or you need both. And then if a lack of sleep is to blame, your doctor may prescribe a program of better sleep hygiene, or they could also refer you for a sleep evaluation. And then if medication is triggering your moods, they'll also look at what you're taking. Your doctor can switch you to a different type of drug. But our message today is mainly that you don't ignore the symptoms, that there are people here to listen to you and help, and please do reach out to us or to your family doctor. So we'll just go to the next slide now, please. So this is important when we think about the link between irritability, anger, and clogged arteries. So we all know that certain lifestyle behaviours can be hazardous. High cholesterol and heart disease, for example. We all know smoking can cause a lot of health problems, and we know that there's a link between obesity and diabetes. But there is an under the radar behaviour that can be just as deadly, and this is irritability. So it seems innocuous, you're just in a bad mood, grouchy, you woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Yes, a pattern of chronic irritability can lead to the same impact as caused by cholesterol, which is resulting in a heart attack. So we thought that was very important to think about. And the danger is that it's a very short distance from irritability to anger, hostility, and then the clogged arteries. So it really is important to pay attention to our behavior and try to slow down and take care of yourself and try to manage our mood if you can. So when you're in a bad mood, you have those feelings simmering inside you and you're ready to explode. These reactions have been studied and they're shown to be a major risk for cardiovascular disease. So we won't quote all of the research today, but if you're interested, we can send it to you because there's a lot of research being done at the moment, which is quite interesting. So for example, one study of 1,305 men with no history of heart problems found that anger tripled their risk of developing heart disease. For example, an angry outburst 2 hours before a heart attack, or before the episode they call it, can make the risk 4 times more likely that you're going to have a heart attack. So this is studies that they did. They looked at people and analysed what were you doing before the heart attack, where were you? Maybe were you in work, did something happen, or were you maybe at home and something went wrong and you lost your temper, and then that stress stays in the body. So anger and irritability is cumulative. These things build up in us. And a study this time of medical students found that the angriest, the people that did express themselves by losing their temper, were more likely to have an early heart attack and 3 times more likely to get cardiovascular disease. Of course, we have to think about culturally as well. I mean, in some cultures, it's quite normal to explode and lose your temper, and it's okay because that's just maybe how people's behavior, it's a learned behavior from your home, but it's how you're actually feeling. Do you feel your heart racing? Is it making you feel sick? So we're all different. Some of us will be able to handle outbursts and stress, and then others, we don't handle it so well. So this is about knowing yourself and your body. So anger and particularly hostility do damage through activation of the stress response, which speeds up our heart rate and blood pressure, and then it suppresses the immune system. So it's a flood of adrenaline that we get. That's like when we do fight or flight, we run from danger, and it can cause these heart spasms and abnormal feelings in the brain, in the heart. So what can we do? The real threat of the anger, for example, they say, is the staying power, that it keeps us in a prolonged state of emergency, and we can have our high blood pressure, and this can stay high for several hours after an event. So it's important to think when we have these short fuses that we think about where is it coming from? Why am I feeling like this? And the research says that it's often from a blocked goal. And we can see this as a cause of irritability in the workplace. For example, maybe you went for a promotion and you didn't get it, or you have a good idea for a project, but nobody's actually listening to you and the project's not going ahead. So it's the frenzy and the hurry that most of us these days, we live life and we have an expectation of immediate gratification. And if we don't get something now, like a report, an email response, or maybe something we're doing online shopping and then it doesn't arrive, it can be very frustrating. So there is a mentality at the moment that we feel that whatever I'm doing is an emergency and I have the right to interrupt others, and this is challenging. So just to talk a little bit more about how we're feeling, we'll just go to the next slide, please, if that's okay. So just think about the consequences of being irritable, the impact of my irritable mood on others, the impact of my mood on myself, and then my reaction to others. So the thing is, it can take time for our behavior to change. We make the same mistakes again and again. That's normal, we're human. But the good news is that with practice, we can change for the better. So the next time you're starting to get irritable and angry, think of your heart, slow down and breathe. And sometimes what I do is I put my hand on my chest and just breathe. and maybe notice what's going on. A lot of us get what's called, a lot of people get irritable bowel syndrome, which is also all connected to the stress in our bodies. So just pay attention, slow down and breathe. And then we'll just go on to the last slide for me, which is the signs that I'm getting irritable. So these are physical, which is maybe you'll feel your temperature rise, you can almost feel your heart beating, or you can feel your pulse in your body. Then it can be behavioral, you can see that you have a short temper, you're withdrawing, and maybe notice your body language. You might feel your face tightening or your fist clenching. And then cognitive, these are negative thoughts. Oh, other people are trying to put me down, they think I'm stupid. So that's just a start, and now I'm going to hand over to Rosa, who's going to explain the next part. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining, and thank you, Mary, for passing on. I would like now to discuss a bit more the brains. It's important to understand how our brain works, and the more you understand how emotions work in your brain and how emotions and thoughts interact, the more control you have over them. So how does it actually work in our brains? And let's have a look together. So the first spark of irritability already activates the amygdala before you're even aware of it. The amygdala region of the brain is primarily associated with emotional processes. It's very important in serious situations. For example, if you see a fire, it alerts you to take action. It cuts up action with your prefrontal cortex, and that's important for thinking and reasoning. And that's actually great, because if you see a fire, you don't need to reason and calculate how much time it will take to burn your house. You should just run and make sure that you're safe. So just as an example, if this is the brain and this is the prefrontal cortex and this is the amygdala is like this and the prefrontal cortex is like this, the moment that you see a fire, it flips your brains and you're not able to think reasonable anymore, because the prefrontal cortex is flipped. Just for your understanding how it works a bit in our brains, because it can be quite complicated. So it's quite clear that we need our amygdala, right? Our amygdala is very important to keep us safe. However, our amygdala does not always judge correctly and does not always see things in perspective, and does not always see when there's a real danger. The amygdala may react the same when you have to speak for an audience or when you feel under pressure talking to your boss. The amygdala can have the same reaction. It can cut off your prefrontal cortex, and that helps you to think logically and to reason. While at that moment it actually would be better to think logically. So it's not always reacting the way that we want it to be. So again, when this happens, your reaction is based on your emotions because of the amygdala, and it's not always based on thinking and reasoning. So this is important to understand. So when the amygdala is activated, it will then activate our hypothalamus. Our hypothalamus, as you can see here in the picture, it's linked to the amygdala. It plays an important part in the hormone production, and it plays a part in many essential functions of the body, such as body temperature, thirst, emotions, blood pressure, and heart rate. And the hypothalamus is an important hormone production. It signals the pituitary gland by discharging corticotropin releasing hormone, also called CRH. And then following, the pituitary activates the adrenal glands by releasing another hormone, which is called adrenocorticotropic hormone. All very complicated names. It's also called ACTH hormone. So these adrenal glands secrete the stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. So this is for you to understand a bit how does it work in our brains and what kind of impact does it have. So please, if we can go maybe to the next slide, where I will explain how the impact, what the impact is of these elevated stress hormones, such as cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. Elevated cortisol causes neurons to accept too much calcium through their membrane. A calcium overload can make cells fire too frequently and die. And the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex that I just discussed, remember that's important for reasoning and thinking, are particularly vulnerable to cortisol and these negative effects. So elevated cortisol causes a loss of neurons in the prefrontal cortex. Suppressed activity in the prefrontal cortex prevents you from using your best judgment. It keeps you from making good decisions and planning for the future. Also, elevated cortisol kills neurons in the hippocampus and disrupts the creation of new ones. Suppressed activity in the hippocampus weakens short-term memory. It also prevents you from forming new memories properly. So this is maybe something that sounds familiar to you, when this could be why you might not remember what you want to say in an argument. So too much cortisol will decrease the serotonin. That's the hormone that makes you happy. A decrease in serotonin can make you feel anger and pain more easily, as well as increase aggressive behavior and leads to depression. So this is just to understand a bit how it works in our brain. The next slide is something that we already also discussed with Mary. What is the impact on our body? It can have an increase in our heart rate, it can have an increase in our cardiovascular system, and it has an impact on our immune system, digestive system, and it can have also cause migraine and headache. I really want to emphasize that it's normal to have feelings in general, and it also includes feelings of irritability. This workshop is we're not aiming to say we should all be, very basic and not have feelings, because feelings are there for a purpose, they are there for a reason. It's just very important to be aware of it and to maybe understand how does it work in our body and why are we reacting in a certain way, and understand why do we react in a certain way to find a better balance. Because sometimes when we are too much irritable all the time, it's not good for ourselves and not good for our environment. So what can we do to slow down? The next slide, we will talk how to calm down when you're feeling irritable and avoid reacting irritably with others. Firstly, what you can do is to tune in and acknowledge that you're feeling this way. Be aware of it. It can help you to keep a diary, to recognize the situations and triggers that prompt feelings of frustrations, and to help you manage your expectations of yourself and also of others. Label the feelings that you have. For example, you can say there's lots of frustrations around at the moment, or this is anger. Make sure that you label your own feelings. Also, find out the source and address it. What's the source of my irritable mood? Ask where the irritability is coming from. What might be good advice is it's not always helpful to figure out your thoughts or problems and to solve it when you're really fired up. If you're really fired up, try to go away for a few seconds and breathe. We really tend to not breathe when we're really fired up. So it's important to take some time to be alone, such as go to the bathroom, or when you're in a meeting and you feel irritated, you can say, thank you for these questions and I'll come back to you later. You don't always have to reply immediately. Breathing exercises may help you to calm your system, like we said with the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. When it's flipped, breathing can really make sure that it's going back to the normal state, and it can be practiced in the moment. Become aware of your body and your breathing can disrupt the flow of negative thoughts. Also, grounding exercises can help. Grounding exercises when you feel the weight of your body as you stand or sit. Focus on your feet, so you can really put your feet on the ground and imagine being supported by the solid ground beneath you. These are tricks and tips that can help you when you're in a meeting, for example, and you feel really irritated and you're not able to walk away. The last thing that we want to discuss is the helicopter view. Sometimes it's helpful to ask yourself some questions and to challenge yourself. Again, it doesn't need to be in the heat of the moment. Sometimes it can, but also maybe when you have a moment for yourself, ask yourself, is this really a thought? Is this thought really a fact, or is it an opinion? And what is a more reasonable explanation? And what's the bigger picture? Sometimes we narrow it when we are in the heat of the moment. Take the helicopter view and put things in perspective and try to challenge yourself. The last thing that I want to mention before I'm handing over to our colleagues is after you've shifted away from your irritable mood, maybe we can go to the next slide, please. So after you've shifted away from the irritable mood, like we discussed before, prepare yourself to re-engage. Irritability can be your mind's way of alerting you that you need a break. So it's important to be compassionate with yourself, acknowledge in your head that you're feeling irritable and how unpleasant it is. That's okay, that's fine. As I said, we are human beings and it's normal to have feelings. Also use your compassion to consider how it can influence the people around you. The last thing that I want to say is to express the unexpressed. It's sometimes difficult, but after you've taken time to calm down and you understand where it comes from, it can be good to share your feelings in a constructive way with your colleagues or your loved ones. Now I would like to hand over to Nicolas, who will more talk about the external dynamics. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary and Rosa. As I was listening to the presentation from our colleagues in the Staff Counsellors Office, I couldn't help reflecting a little bit about what they were saying and how it applied to my own life. And so I shared with you, a bit of an incident that we had just before we started. And, the Nicholas of maybe 5 or 10 years ago would have reacted totally different. There would have been a lot of yelling and screaming. There would have been perhaps some door slamming, and everyone would have been upset. And I would have taken those emotions into this presentation. And as Mary and Rosa were explaining what happens physically, right? The staying power of anger, the amygdala hijack, where your amygdala takes over your emotions. I realized how much progress I've made in the last 5 years, where, I was relatively calm. My heart rate was only slightly elevated. I wasn't dwelling on the incident, although the fact that I've mentioned it twice now perhaps suggests that I'm dwelling on it more than I realized I was. And so the one thing that really struck me about their presentation was the point that Mary said at the beginning, that sometimes we don't notice our mood changes. And that really talks about the value of feedback from people who are close to us. And the last slide that Rosa presented about being compassionate with yourself, being honest with yourself, and expressing the unexpressed. And so I think that's a really nice segue to this conversation about external dynamics and how do we provide one another with feedback when perhaps we've crossed some boundaries. And so we're going to touch briefly on some techniques, both in terms of, how to have those boundary setting conversations. And then my colleague Elizabeth will talk about apologies, which is always a very difficult thing to do, no matter where we are. So perhaps we can go to the next slide. And we're going to be talking about boundary setting conversations and apologies. And one thing that we'll do in the workshop is, the theory behind this is quite simple. You'll see, it'll take me 5 or 10 minutes to explain it, but the practice of it is actually quite a little more difficult, because you have to moderate your own internal dynamics and then be able to, have a boundary setting conversation, sometimes even with a supervisor, which is often, quite difficult. So we'll talk about the techniques, we'll talk about some of the hurdles and barriers to do that, and then I'll pass over to Elizabeth. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So we're going to be talking about how to have a boundary setting conversations. And a boundary setting conversation is something that I've come up with in terms of, how do you have a conversation with someone who you feel has crossed the line, right? A colleague who perhaps has interrupted you in a meeting, children who, notwithstanding the fact that you mentioned the night before that you were going to be doing this presentation, still insisted on not only having an argument and a fight, but then storming out of their apartment and leaving their mother and father to chase them down the street. So how do you have these boundary setting conversations in a way that gives people the gift of feedback, but doesn't necessarily make the situation worse? So in our office, oftentimes we suggest using the SBI model, which was developed by the Center for Creative Leadership. And essentially, the SBI model stands for situation, behavior, and impact. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see what each of those components mean. So situation means that when you're giving that feedback, you describe when and where the behaviors were observed. And you have to be very specific about the situation in order to give clear feedback. So for example, it's better to say when I was presenting at today's staff meeting as opposed to in the meeting today, because the first one is much more specific. Let's go to the next slide that describes behavior. So behavior describes the actions that were directly observed. And again, the recommendation is to use specifics and not an interpretation or judgment of the person's behavior, because that interpretation or judgment can be very subjective. So, for example, what would be better to say, and you disagreed with my proposal and repeatedly interrupted, as opposed to when you were being openly disrespectful to me, because the second one contains a judgment and the first one is a lot more objective. So let's go to the third, impact. Describe how the person's behavior impacted you and others who were present. Using I statements will make your internal experience known to the individual. So it's better to say, I felt as if my ideas weren't heard. I was embarrassed to be put down in front of the whole staff, as opposed to, it made me look bad in front of everyone, right? Again, that's a judgment. So these, again, it's very simple, and doing it is quite difficult. And it's even more difficult because you don't know how the other person will react. Perhaps, they'll react with an apology that is graceful and sincere, as Elizabeth will describe in a moment, but perhaps they won't. And so that uncertainty about how they will react often makes these types of conversations very difficult. And in our office, one of the things we do is something, and I call it walking through the contours of a conversation, but different practitioners call it something else. And essentially what I try to do is to help people imagine how the conversation is going to unfold. And we don't necessarily do a role play, but we try to sort of immerse ourselves in, the hypotheticals of, if you were to use the SBI model, how do you anticipate the other person will react? And then we go through that iterative process, and oftentimes it helps people, prepare for those conversations a lot better. Maybe if we can go to the next slide, I'll give you some pointers about, having these conversations. First, and these pointers are from a book called Radical Candor by Kim Scott, and it's something that I'm in the process of reading because I think it's really an excellent book in terms of how do you give one another feedback. And the first thing I would imagine that many of you, when you're hearing me speak, are saying, well, there are some people who I can give this sort of feedback to, and there are others like my boss or, the director that, it would just be too risky. And so one of the things that often, I do with my visitors is we try to frame things in terms of what are barriers as opposed to hurdles. So if you frame something as a barrier, right, it essentially says you're not going to be able to do it, right? I don't want to give feedback to my boss because, he's just going to be angry at me for the rest of the week. As opposed to, there's a risk that if I give feedback to my boss, he might be angry. And then the question becomes, how do you mitigate that risk? And so oftentimes when people come to speak to us, we talk about, not only how to have the conversation, but, how to turn barriers into hurdles. And then one of the other things that I've found in the book to be really useful is Kim Scott describes this process that was developed by Chris Argyle called the left-hand column process. And she uses it really as a way of debriefing conversations, but I think it could also be used for preparing conversations. And it's a quite simple process. In the left-hand column, you take a sheet of paper, you cut it in half, and in the left-hand column, you write what you're actually thinking. And in the right-hand column, then you try to express, what you want to say to the boss or to your counterpart. And the interesting thing about doing that is that oftentimes what you're really thinking is so different from what you want to say. And that's an important lesson to learn because, as human beings, we have this quite developed sense to really discern when people are being disingenuous with us. And so if there's a great difference between what you're thinking and what you're saying, people will pick up on that. And so, again, when we work with people, and we do this exercise, we see if we can't make the words in a diplomatic way align a little more to thoughts, or maybe, helping people reframe their thoughts, right? So, for example, if you think your boss is a miserable person and he's just a bully, and it's going to be very difficult to provide that sort of feedback if they, interrupted you in a meeting or perhaps embarrassed you. And so oftentimes it's about trying to lessen the gap between the thoughts and the words. Now, all of these things, as I said at the very beginning, are very easy to explain, and they're quite difficult to put into practice. And it really does take a lot of practice. And oftentimes, the things that I'm most proud of is when I help someone, practice a little bit to provide this feedback to a colleague or even to a family member in order to have give them the feedback that they need, especially if they're not aware of those mood shifts or that sometimes we act quite unconsciously. So this has been the end of my presentation, and I want to pass the presentation to my colleague Elizabeth. And again, we look forward to the next session where we dive into, some of the, these skills that are necessary to both manage our internal dynamics and, manage our external dynamics. So thank you very much. I'll pass it to Elizabeth.
Thank you, Nicholas, and welcome everybody to the second part of the presentation on external dynamics. Nicholas was speaking about how to have boundary setting conversations when somebody else may have crossed your boundary. And I'm going to talk about what you can do when you may have crossed a boundary by being overly irritable or disrespectful or using offensive language to somebody else because you were taken over by emotions, for example. So the art is really to learn how to say sorry with sincerity and grace, and how to do that in an effective way. And so the objective, if we can go on to the next slide, please. The objective is, on the one hand, to share my passion with you about the reconciliatory power of an effective apology, and to create awareness about what exactly it is that makes an apology effective. And in that, we are also going to sensitize you about what is a false apology. What is it that that you shouldn't do, because of, obviously there's a negative impact associated if you don't do it properly. And bearing in mind that in very few of our workspaces, unfortunately, the practice of apologizing to one another is not all that common. We would like to launch a aspirational vision that we promote together a culture of apology as part of the type of respectful and harmonious workplace that we all value and aspire, and that we want to co-create. So let's go to the next slide, please. And the central question really is, why is it so hard to say sorry? Why is it such a big thing? And what makes it so difficult to apologize? And I would have so much liked to have a live debate about this question, because from experience I know that we always benefit from a lot of insight from the participants. So you're most welcome to share your thoughts in the chat, and perhaps we can go back to to your contributions in a short while, because I'm really curious about your views. What we often hear from people in the Ombuds office when we launch the idea of an apology as one of the available options People say sometimes that they believe that it could be perceived as a sign of weakness. People do not want to appear weak. They believe it's not appropriate to show vulnerability towards their colleagues, and they believe that it could open them up for an attack. So there's a lot of fear around the notion of apologizing. But what is very interesting is that the majority of people would regard a person who goes out and expresses an apology as somebody who is demonstrating strength of character. So it's usually seen as something very, very positive. And we also know that supervisors who have a practice to apologize to their teams, to their staff when they have made a mistake, they tend to grow in esteem. And in fact, it has a trust reinforcing impact in the team. There may also be situations when we simply don't know how to go about it, because we might be overtaken by emotions, and we know we should apologize, but we don't really know how. And the longer we wait, the more difficult it tends to become. Perhaps I'll stop here and let me just check in with Natalie. Natalie, did we get any? Let me just scroll down.
It's Natalie here. No answers yet to the question, why is it hard to say sorry? But we do invite you to publish any should you wish to. Actually, we've had one come in, a lack of humility. So thank you to whoever submitted that one. Yeah. But please do share if you would like.
Yeah, very good point. Lack of humility, because unfortunately, many of us, and particularly when we are caught up in conflictual situations, we are very much under the reign of our ego, and the ego, has a very strong impact on, what it tells us we're allowed to do and what not. So yes, humility, an effective apology does take humility, but it's exactly that humility that will sink in with the other person and bring about the acceptance that we're trying to get. So if we can go to the next slide, please. We probably all know the good feeling that we have when we have gone to apologize and our apology was accepted by the other person. It's really a great sense of relief, and in that we are giving a gift not only to the other person but also to ourselves, because it really clears the air and it allows us to reconnect and move forward. So I think, you will all agree with me that an effective apology is a powerful means of reconciliation and for restoring relationships and trust. Now, the importance, and I've highlighted it in blue, is that the apology has to be effective. And what do we mean by that? An effective apology should be worded in such a way that the person to whom it is addressed is touched in such a way that he or she is able to get his hurt, is able to let go of the feeling of hurt, so that the two are then able to reconnect again. It's about being able to letting go. And I will, perhaps in the next slide, we will go a little bit deeper. What needs to happen for that letting go response and that healing to take place. So I have collated 5 elements that I think are critical for making an apology truly effective. And the first one, and this is a principle that will go, that will permeate all the remaining ones, is sincerity. Do we really mean it? Are you really coming to this place of expressing an apology with an open heart? And if not, your tone of voice and your body language will clearly, be picked up by the other person, that you're not completely honest about it, and so this will probably bounce back at you. Secondly, there needs to be a recognition of responsibility, and so you want to declare that you have reflected about the fact that there's something you did that was hurtful for the other, and you're taking responsibility for that. And it could be expressed, by a statement like, what I said was insensitive, or I could have chosen different words. And then moving on from here, what is really central to any strong apology is an acknowledgement that there's been a negative impact from your actions on the other, so that through your actions the other person has experienced hurt or pain, and you acknowledge that. And it could be expressed in the way like, I realized this was hurtful for you. If somebody said this to me, I would not have liked it either. We know from prepared to let go. If I've just lost the presentation, it's back now. Thank you. People will only be able to let go and accept the apology if they get the feeling that the other person has truly understood the impact that they have experienced, the negative impact, the pain that they have, the hurt that they have experienced. Only then. So this, for me, together with the first one, is really the most important principles that you want to ensure you express. Going on from there, you may wish to express a statement of regret. I'm really sorry, very simple. Really sorry I reacted so irritably to you. And then you want to perhaps give an indication of a positive future intention. So I will make sure this is not going to happen again. And so by saying that, you want to put the relationship back to normal. I hope we will be able to once again work well together. So 5 elements that are very important. It doesn't mean that a strong apology, needs to cover all of those 5. But from experience, I know that if you go through all of them and you may wish to prepare, then you have the biggest the chance that the person is going to accept your apology. So let's go to the next slide. We've talked a lot about what is a strong and an effective apology, and unfortunately there is also something of the opposite, which I call false apologies or non-apologies. What do I mean by that? A false apology is a non-apology is a forced apology because it may be the right thing to do. Maybe a supervisor has said, go and apologize, or your colleague might say, I insist on having an apology, otherwise I'm not going to to move on from here. Now, a forced apology rarely resonates in terms of sincerity and being really truly heart-based. Now people apologize because it is politically the correct thing to do, but they may not feel remorse or sorrow. They may build in a lot of excuses, why they did what they did. And by doing that, they are already kind of disconnecting with the other. And they may implicitly blaming the other person for having taken offense. So we see that quite a lot. And if we go to the next slide, I will show you some examples. And I'm sure you have heard these non-apologies in the past. A classic one is, for example, I'm sorry you're feeling that way. There's something very patronizing about that, that statement. Isn't it? Because the person isn't really sorry about his own action, and he's putting or she's putting the blame about the impact you're feeling a certain way on the receiving end. So this is not likely to elicit a good reaction from the other party. The second one, women get that a lot. I'm sorry you're so easily hurt. Again, the blame for the reaction is with the other person for being oversensitive. So the person himself who has, done the wrong is not really sorry. Then it's not a surprise that, these type of apologies are unlikely or very rarely get accepted by the other person. Just, in the interest of time, I will just go to the last one. I'm sorry I made that joke, but it was funny. So, there's no remorse. There's, in fact, the person repeats, why he did what he did, and, not empathizing that what he said may have been offensive to the other. And so it is like, if we go to the next slide, please, it's like putting salt on an open wound. So it's like a double humiliation when you get an apology like that, with the effect that trust gets even further eroded, and this feeling of hurt, is even deeper, and the situation might even get more entrenched. Coming to the end, if we go to the next slide, I wanted to give you a little takeaway for what you can do if you feel like it would be appropriate to express an apology and you don't know how to go about it. This is a very easy 5-step process, and the principles that I have talked about earlier of making it a strong one are embedded in that process. So when we are going to do the seminar later on, the workshop, we will go much deeper in terms of crafting together the actual wording of a strong apology. But for now, I would just leave it with those 5 steps, and starting with it's always good if things are sensitive to ask for a moment to speak to the other person, because you want to make sure that that person who is obviously in a state of pain or hurt is really in a kind of receiving mode and ready to hear you. It's also good to prepare, as I said, because that allows you to capture those additional steps in the process. Make sure you don't justify the mistake that you made by bringing in excuses. Be mindful of not implicitly blaming the other person. Acknowledge the pain or the embarrassment experienced. Again, for me, this is central, and it's also at the central place here. Do say sorry and express, how you're feeling about what has happened, and finally give an indication of what you intend to do differently in the future to make sure it won't happen again. So if ever you're in a situation where you would like to say sorry and you feel you need a little bit of help, you can also call us in the Ombuds office, and we can do a little coaching session with you and get you going. So with this, I have come to the end of my part of the presentation, and I would like to hand over for the question and answers. So over to you, Natalie. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and to all of our speakers before you. And thank you all for joining us and taking the time. For me personally, this has also been incredibly useful information and a lot that I did not know already. I apologize in advance because we seem to be having some technical issues and I can't put over some new faces. So you're going to see the slides for a little bit longer. I think that also is proof that I'll definitely try not to be irritated while this happens. We'll move through this little kink. We have had quite a few questions coming in, so thank you for sending those. But also our counsellors and also our ombudsman have been responding as much as possible to those questions. So if you can also take the time to read through those answers, that would be wonderful, as I know we are running over time. So thank you for joining. I would like to paste a link before we go into any questions. In case you need to leave, please do join us for the second session on the 1st of October. This is where we will be able to answer a lot of these questions that we weren't able to address today because of time, and also be able to work in a much more practical environment on the principles that we've learned today. So please register. It is essential that you register for this one, because we will hold it in a bit of a different platform to be able to see everybody's faces. So you can use the QR code that you can see on the screen now, or I've also posted the link in the chat if you prefer just to sign up on your laptop or computer screen now. We've had a few questions coming in about getting a copy of the recording of the session as well as the slides. The answer to those questions is yes. We'll be very happy to provide the video recording on our website as soon as it's ready, as well as we will also post the PDF version of the slides. We do have some other questions coming in, so if you'd like to stay with us, you're more than welcome to while we address some final questions. There were a few actually responses, Elizabeth, to the question of why is it hard to say sorry? So thank you everyone for joining those. There are also some questions coming in about why we should apologize. So perhaps we will look at a few of those. The question on why to apologize, this is coming in, sorry, from someone who would prefer to talk to you in person. The other one is, how do we deal with expected reactions? I feel like sometimes people expect you to react in a certain way, especially in a current situation. Usually I'm calm and don't react. But what happens then if I'm told that I'm unreactive about it? How can I react appropriately? Is there one of our speakers who would like to answer that question with any thoughts?
Mary, do you want me to start, and then you can. So I found this a really interesting question, because it's true that, if we're overreactive, we get criticized for being overreactive, and then if we don't display emotions, we end up being criticized for being unemotional. And I guess, in the workplace, if you had to err on one side or the other, it's probably better to be under emotional than over emotional. But I also think that, that's a tough question. And I wonder, I'm thinking about some of the questions that you could pose to the person asking or making the comment that you're too unemotional, right? Like, does that mean, I'm wondering, is it that there isn't enough feedback to see how, the statement landed? Is it because, they were expecting a certain reaction? This might be an opportunity for having a deeper conversation, especially if that's just your normal way of interacting. So I think there are potentially questions to be asked and to dive deeper about, why is it so important to demonstrate a certain degree of emotion? And oftentimes, I think saying, your statement has made me angry, I think that is acceptable. Yelling at someone is probably, especially in the workplace, not so acceptable. So, there is this, it is a very fine art of, the expression of emotion. But I'd be curious about, why is the person, what does the person need the emotions for? Is it for more feedback? Is there, they want to conform to, what the expectations were about going into the conversation? But maybe Mary or Rosa have some additional points. I'll pass it over to them.
Thank you, Nicholas. I think that's a very important point. And I think what's can be difficult for us at the UN is because we are a range of people from different cultures with different backgrounds, different ways of expressing ourselves, and different learned behaviors about what's appropriate at work and what isn't. So sometimes somebody may be offended when for somebody else it's no big deal. Like, people can be in the one room and someone can say something and we all react differently. And it can also be depending on what's going on in our personal lives and how tired we are, or maybe the stresses that we're under. There's times in our life when we're more vulnerable than others and we might take something the wrong way. But I think it's very important, like one of the purposes of this webinar is to try and open up these conversations and this dialogue, and we're trying to change the culture at the UN. Of course, there's lots of really good teams that work very well, lots of good projects, and we're all going through COVID together and all the fears and the uncertainties over that. And the point of this is to think that we are human beings and that we all make mistakes. There's some days where we're just grumpy or tired, and it's trying to like maybe recognize those feelings in ourselves, and then maybe on those days don't speak at a meeting. Like Rosa said earlier, if someone is asking you questions and you're getting irritated, you can say, I'll come back, I need to think about this and I'll come back to you with your question, and let's maybe talk privately. But we are all human, and I think it's important to have an open mind when we're at work. It's not, often we feel we have to be best friends with people at work. We don't, we just have to be professional. Our best friends can be in our personal life. But these tips today can also help you in your personal life. So, but I think it leads us nicely to, there's been a lot of very good questions. For example, somebody also said that apologizing looks weak. Again, that's very cultural, and it's something that maybe we see in the UN. So how do we overcome that? And Elizabeth explained about, I thought very well, about recognizing our responsibility. Say, for example, I could have chosen different words to express myself, and what makes an apology effective. And then from the internal dynamics, it's about thinking, okay, am I in a bad mood today? Am I really tired? Maybe, for example, you might have been planning to go to Spain on holidays and now you can't go because if you come back, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks. So there's irritants outside and in our environment that affect us. But I think if you're interested in today and if you thought it was useful, please get in touch with all of us and share your ideas. And then this will help us to think about how we can develop more for the workshop on the 1st of October. And on the 1st of October, we're going to have smaller groups, and it'll be your chance to actually come on the screen and speak with us and share also your ideas and your experiences. Like Nicholas shared about maybe 5 years ago, he would have reacted very differently to his daughters today. But now with time and with wisdom and with his interest in this subject, he's able to manage his emotions better. So we would like to hear from you as well, tips of maybe you had a conflict in the workplace or at home and how did you resolve it? So, but thank you very much for everyone to coming along today. Thank you, Natalie and Nivert. We are so grateful to your help and support in the Knowledge and Learning Commons. It's fantastic to all work together. And thank you very much, Nicholas, Elizabeth, Debbie, and Rosa and Sharmila. And I wonder if anyone else would like to say anything before we go, but thank you very much, everybody. And thank you for attending.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers and for you for joining. We see a few of you dropping off now. We totally understand. It is time to go, but we hope to see you at the next session on the 1st of October. We've just put the link there again for you in case you'd like to register right now while you're here. If you have feedback for us as well on this session and any questions on further sessions, don't hesitate to email us as well at commons@un.org. You'll actually see on the next slide, we have our email address there in case you have any questions for us. Also keep up to date on our website as well. We'll make sure to have the PDF slides of today's session and the recording there as soon as possible. So thank you very much again to all of our speakers and the production team behind the scenes, and to all of you for joining. We hope that it was relevant and useful for you, and we would like to see you again. We'd love to see you again to join in the practical application on the 1st of October. So thanks very much from us. Have a great rest of the day and week, and good luck with all of your work as we continue and come back from holidays. Have a great day. Thanks, and see you again soon. Bye.